This is the only museum in North America of human rights.
The fourth floor of this building is of very huge significance. It's exactly why we're here.
When we highlight differences between groups of people to increase suspicion of them, to insult them, or to exclude them, we are going down a path known as othering.
I have so many people standing outside here trying to get in. Then why are you guys protecting this?
It's just, it's reaching out there. Yeah. On the entrance.
Public health order states that it has to be open. Yeah. Visitors must be double vaccinated.
The special circumstances around being able to go to a movie or a Bomber game if you're double vaxxed are extra privileges.
And just like that, 2 weeks to slow the spread has turned into a forever war against those who aren't fully up to date on their QR code.
Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
What are human rights? Well, unfortunately, that depends on who you ask, whether it's your neighbor, your employer, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Each of them has their own definition, but what's shared amongst all of them is an understanding that we're supposed to treat people fairly and with dignity. As the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights would say, quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and in rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood." At no point do they say you need a QR code to be considered human. But if you went to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, you might think otherwise, as you might have seen in our recent video.
The public health order states that it has to be open. Yeah. Visitors must be double vaccinated.
I have so many people standing outside here trying to get in. Then why are you guys protecting this?
It's just, it's reaching out there. Yeah. On the entrance.
This is the only museum in North America of human rights.
The fourth floor of this building is of very huge significance. It's exactly why we're here.
That's right, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights has begun to discriminate against their own clientele, all over whether or not they have the state-sponsored QR code meant to determine whether or not you've been fully vaccinated. This is something that I experienced while I was there as well. But what makes this all even more surreal is the fact that Manitoba has already ended their state of emergency. Although thanks to their top bureaucrat, Brent Roussin, he's issued a new set of public health orders that are meant to go on seemingly forever.
Public Health has approved the Winnipeg Blue Bombers game on August 5th to take place with 100% capacity to fully vaccinated fans.
He goes on to say, the threat to public health cannot be prevented, reduced, or eliminated without taking special measures.
The special circumstances around being able to go to a movie or a Bomber game if you're double vaxxed are extra privileges.
And just like that, these so-called extra privileges have now gone from being a temporary measure to a permanent one. So when I went to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which is in Winnipeg, Manitoba, I wanted to know about their reaction to these newfound orders. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to speak with a representative while I was there. What's this say? This is the media representative?
Yeah, Maureen Fitzhenry. Yeah. And this is just a general email box and hotline. Try both of them, but I'll try both first.
Okay, thank you very much. Though I did reach out by email, as you might have heard in our last video, I actually got a response. I got a proper response. They answered all of my questions, even if they were interesting to say the least. But that's exactly what we're going to detail for you today. Before we get to their unfortunate email response, I want to remind you about a civil liberties project aimed at fighting against the vaccine mandates. That's a project set up by the Democracy Fund, and we have a portal set up on our website called FightVaccinePassports.com that is dedicated to sending donations straight to the legal defense team for those who are being marginalized by the vaccine passport. Donations would qualify you for a charitable tax receipt, but more important than that, in the season of giving, why not donate to a cause that could set a precedent for the rest of the country in ending these QR codes? So to start, I wanted to go back to the very beginning and find out what the motive was behind the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And the late Israel Asper, who pioneered this museum, well, this is what he had to say.
I went to Prime Minister Trudeau and said, look, your magnum opus is the Canadian Charter of Rights, and a national institution should be launched to teach its values and the precepts of it.
So it was envisioned as a national institution meant to teach the values and the precepts of the Canadian Charter of Rights. Well, there you have it. But I wanted to know if the current regulations that are being imposed in relation to the QR codes, and whether or not you have the right colored QR code means that you may or may not be allowed to enter. I wanted to know if that was in line with the vision that Israel Asper had for the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. The museum's adherence to government regulations designed to combat the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic does not conflict with Israel Asper's vision for human rights education. I gotta be honest, she actually makes me feel a little silly for asking the question because, of course, they're an educational platform. They're not an advocacy group. In other words, they don't need to practice what they preach, which I think is unfortunate because there's a certain gravitas that comes with their lack of stance on such matters that many would argue pertain to human rights. I remember when YouTube used to be the Wild West of content. However, as the years have gone on, so too has their censorship. And it's not like all of these crazy, ridiculous videos have gone away. It's just that they're not being shown to you anymore. And you get a glimpse of that in our own videos where we're actually being censored on YouTube. You see the little that's you being censored by YouTube. Now, we still show our videos in full, but if you want to check those out, you're going to have to go to rebelnews.com. That's the only place where you can see these videos fully uncensored.